MurrayPhoto.com. Welcome. We are here in my room, but obviously this video is not being taken in my room. This is just mostly a collage of photos, but today we are talking about landscapes. This first photo is out on my parents' boat. It was handheld, first thing I want to talk about when you're taking landscapes is get the horizon as flat as possible. If you have it tilted to the side, then it doesn't look as good, not as professional, and it's just not as interesting. It looks a lot better when it is as flat as you can get it. Now, not necessarily in all cases, but for the most part, what I've seen, it's best to have it as flat as possible. Second thing I would like to talk about is the settings. If you're using a DSLR, definitely switch your camera to manual or aperture priority and bring your aperture down to f8 or f11 because you want to get as best sharpness as you can, as much of the background as sharp as you can. So you bring down the aperture to open up your depth of field, to open up your depth of field so you have a better depth of field. Second picture, also on the boat, I have Mount Rainier in the background, and I got a little sailboat that we were about to pass off to the left using the rule of thirds. And I tried to line this up nicely. When you're taking landscapes, definitely try as best you can to use a tripod. But if you are in a situation like I was on the boat that you can't use a tripod, then obviously you can do it freehand. Next picture, I was in Hawaii at this time. I did not have my DSLR. I had my like a little camcorder thing that I was using. I don't even know where it is. It's somewhere in my room. It takes decent pictures, but not great. But after a bunch of photoshopping, as you can see, I got a pretty dramatic effect with a weird lens flare, but it looks alright. When it comes to landscapes, you don't always have to use rule of thirds, especially sunsets. For this photo, especially when I was in Hawaii, you definitely try and include the sky as much as possible, because the sky is just beautiful. But in some situations, you don't always include the sky, like this next photo. The sky wasn't necessarily all that interesting or beautiful. It was very cloudy and just plain, and it just wasn't anything interesting to look at. So I got a lower position and got mostly the sand in the picture, with the big rock thing, boulder, I don't know what that is, in the top right. I got my horizon even, and I got the horizon higher. You can have the horizon low or high, just depends on if you're including a bunch of the sky or a bunch of the ground. And with this particular photo, actually, I think I didn't have the aperture down to f8 or f11. I think I had it at f5.6 or 6.3. I'm not sure. And still got a decent amount of sharpness, but I was trying to get mostly the ground in focus. Next photo is in Garibaldi. I'm not going to bother explaining where that's at, but it's a nice place. Has decent weather sometimes, depending what time of the year you go. But with this image, I lined up the horizon, and the sky was okay, interesting. It wasn't super interesting, but it was okay, and I liked the colors and all that kind of stuff. So I lined it up and had the mountains drifting down into the sea with some rocks and people out in the distance. And it's a decent shot. I definitely like how it's lined up. The lighting's nice. Probably could add a little more contrast to the sky, but it looks pretty good. Now the second photo is basically the same as the last photo, but I included most of the ground because the sky was not as interesting as I would like, and I didn't want to point the camera at the sun as much because I knew it would mess up with the exposure. Next thing I'd like to talk about with landscapes, you need a tripod for this, is a double exposure. So as you can see in this next photo, the ground is extremely dark. There's my brother in the bottom right. This is a completely unphotoshopped picture. And the sun dead center in the middle, so not super interesting. The sky is okay. The clouds are kind of interesting, and the colors are not super contrasty, but they're okay. But I want to talk about double exposure. So you need a tripod. You set up your camera. I personally always shoot in manual, but if you're going to do this, yeah, you have to shoot in manual because you're adjusting two settings. So you adjust your aperture down to f8 or f11, whichever you choose, and then your shutter speed, you make it pretty long. This kind of depends on what situation you're in, especially if you're shooting at the sun. You make your shutter speed pretty long, overexposing the sky and making the ground as closely exposed as you'd like as possible. Then after you get that picture, you don't move the camera at all. Then you speed up your shutter speed as much as you need to expose the expose the sky the way you like it. Then you Photoshop those two images together using layer masks. So this next photo I just did a couple days ago. I don't know if you saw it in my last video. This is an overexposed photo for the ground with some weird lens flare, which I photoshopped out in a later product. Which lens flare is not usually easy to Photoshop out, but if you can, go for it. If you can't, then just deal with it. Some people like it, just your opinion, whatever. Then the second photo is underexposed. I probably could have underexposed it just a little less. That way the sky would just be a little bit more, pop would have been a little better. But it turned out okay, especially with that little tiny bird out in the background. Kind of draws you in, I guess. I don't know. Last photo is those two photos photoshopped together. I made it a little dark around the edges, kind of give it a vignette, just a slight vignette, and kind of pull you in. As you can see, the ground is nice and light with some dark shadows, and then the sky is not extremely overexposed, because I was pointing into the sun, so it's not necessarily easy to expose that perfectly, but it turned out okay. I probably could have underexposed it just a little bit more. So, wrap things up. Bring your aperture down to f8 or f11. Try low angles, especially in beach settings. Use rule of thirds with your background, but if you can get it dead center and make it look interesting, then go for it. Include mostly sky if you like, or include mostly ground. It's up to you, depending on the situation that you're in. And use double exposures using layer masks. If you know how to use Photoshop, then go ahead and do that. Experiment with that. You just take the two photos into Photoshop. You take one of the photos, put a layer mask over it, and then you invert it or just color in with black or white, just depending on what you're doing to the photo, to paint in what areas you want darker or lighter or whatever. Just depends on how you set up your photos. MurrayPhoto.com. See ya.